Hi, my name is Lachlan G, and this is my presentation for Task 11. Here are the questions I'll be talking about. Question 1 includes, explain how a studied text marginalizes a voice to privilege a perspective. The text I decided to do was A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. The play is set in post-war America in the 1940s, and the story follows the life of Blanche as she goes to live with her sister Stella and her husband Stanley. Blanche comes from the Old South in a rich livelihood, while Stanley is from the rising working class. These contrasting perspectives and the fading influence of Blanche leads to her marginalization and the preference of Stanley. A Streetcar Named Desire has effectively marginalized and privileged particular voices, namely Blanche's and Stanley's, who share different outlooks on life. Through the cultural norms and changing values of the time period, the text has effectively marginalized Blanche's voice, a rich Southerner, in order to privilege Stanley's. Blanche's power has been diminished and overshadowed by the success of the working class, represented by Stanley. Additionally, Blanche's voice is further marginalized by how her opinions are discredited due to her instability, questionable morals, and drinking problems. Stanley has had his own voice privilege through how he is a male living in a patriarchal society with patriarchal values. This marginalization of Blanche's voice, both within the text and to the audience, serves to privilege Stanley's perspective as a character with a rising level of influence and power within the play. The first point I'm going to talk about is how Stanley's voice has been privileged due to him being a working class member of society. Stanley as a character has had his voice privileged in the play due to his role as a working class member in his society. He is the breadwinner of the house. He works for his money. Blanche's position as a Southern belle with a rich lifestyle contrasts with Stanley's low to middle class lifestyle that he works hard for. Blanche does not appreciate his efforts due to his poor lifestyle, and Stanley does not appreciate Blanche's rich persona, as she didn't earn her money in the same way that he worked for his. When Blanche lost Belle Reve and her job, she changed from being rich and influential to being poor, weak, and reliant on Stanley. She is unable to accept the truth, as when she enters Stanley's house and meets Stella, they converse. "Why didn't you let me know?" "Tell you what, Blanche. Why, that you had to live in these conditions." This makes Blanche seem out of touch, as she seems to be whiny and complaining about the conditions of Stanley and Stella's home. Stanley's pride in his home, despite its imperfections, makes Blanche appear snobby and delicate, which causes the viewer to lose respect for her, marginalizing her voice. The viewer may come to respect Stanley instead of Blanche, who puts in the effort to afford his lifestyle, so his voice becomes more privileged. Blanche's credibility from other characters is impacted by her rich lifestyle, despite being poor. This leads to suspicion and distrust, and hence the marginalization of her voice, as the characters are unsure of how she's able to keep up this rich persona. An example of this is in the quotation. He pulls open the wardrobe trunk, standing in the middle of the room, and jerks out an armful of dresses. "Open your eyes to this stuff. Do you think she got them out of a teacher's pay?" This revelation has made Stanley seem like a voice of reason, as it exposes Blanche's seemingly nonsensical way of life, and how she has all of this expensive stuff, but somehow she's not able to afford a home for herself and has to live with Stanley. This makes the viewer lose trust in Blanche, as they start to believe that she's hiding something more than the viewer knows currently. The second point I'll be talking about is how Stanley's voice has been privileged due to being a male in a patriarchal society. Stanley is seen asserting his dominance and control over Stella throughout the film. An example of this is when Stella says, "Stanley doesn't give me a regular allowance, he likes to pay the bills himself." This shows that Stanley has the control over how any money is spent in the household, even if it means restricting Stella. This was common in the 1940s, as men often had control over decisions in the household. It acts as justification for Stanley's actions, meaning he can get away with a lot more than would be expected of a man in today's society. Another example of Stanley asserting his control is in the quotation. He seizes her arm. "Don't you ever talk to me that way. Pig, Pollock, disgusting, vulgar, greasy. Them kind of words have been on your tongue and your sisters too much around here." Stanley's power is shown by how comfortable he is being physical. This dominance comes after Stella had demanded, "Help me clean up the table." This shows that Stanley may be afraid of losing the power dynamic he currently has, where he has the control over Stella, and Stella has no control. And so as soon as she is assertive about something, Stanley feels like he has to act. It shows that Stanley has the inherent power over Stella in the household. And when Blanche visits, Stanley's voice is heard more, as he is more respected as the dominant figure rather than Blanche. So his voice is privileged, while the women's voices are marginalized. The third point I'll be talking about is the marginalization of Blanche's voice through her breaking of the norms. Blanche has allowed her own voice to be marginalized in the text through the moral values that she carries. An example of this is how she is portrayed as manipulative for pretending to be younger than she is in order to attract younger men. She also lied about losing her job as a teacher. Blanche's manipulation of Mitch, say that 10 times, in attempt to secure a stable future for herself is a key example of her skewed moral compass, as she actively stays out of the light and acts unusually flirty in order to present herself more highly. This manipulation is seen in the quotation. "You lied to me, Blanche. Don't say I lied to you. Lies, 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 inside and out. All lies." Mitch's realization of this manipulation gives gravity to the situation, causing the audience to feel sympathy for him and anger towards Blanche's deceptive actions. This crippling image of Blanche that is created from her deception discredits her as a character, as she is portrayed as selfish and manipulative, which makes the reader no longer trust anything that she says. Blanche's voice is further marginalized through her mental illness. Her traumatizing past with Alan and his death have had an obvious effect on her health, and her declining mental state is represented by how disassociated with the world she gets as the polka music rises and she begins appearing insane. This is evident when Blanche is talking to Mitch and he sees just how lost Blanche truly is. A distant revolver shot is heard. Blanche seemed relieved. "There now, the shot. It always stops after that." "Are you boxed out of your mind?" Blanche now appears to not be mentally fit enough to have her opinions considered, which marginalizes her voice, and privileges Stanley's voice when he voices his concerns over Blanche staying over. Blanche is further disconnected from the world due to her alcoholism and how addicted she is to liquor. This reliance on liquor from Blanche has marginalized her voice to the reader, and to the others in the play, as she is just represented as an alcoholic, and as if her opinion doesn't matter as much due to this. In summary, A Streetcar Named Desire has marginalized Blanche's voice in order to privilege Stanley's. Stanley's use of the patriarchal society in the 1940s allows his voice to be more privileged over Blanche's. Stanley's working class position allows him to be seen more highly than Blanche's. Stanley's working class position allows him to be seen more highly than Blanche, who didn't work for her now lost wealth. Blanche's destruction of her own credibility is caused by the marginalization of her own voice, due to her manipulation, mental health issues, and drinking. The second question I'll be talking about today is, analyze how stylistic features are used to create meaning in a studied text. The text I chose for this question is The Road. The Road by Cormac McCarthy is a post-apocalyptic novel that follows the journey of a father and his young son as they travel through a desolate landscape. The novel takes place after an unknown apocalyptic event has nearly wiped out the earth. Everything is dead and burnt. The sun is blotted out by ash, all plants are extinct, and everything is a fight for survival. The Road attempts to convey that the post-apocalyptic environment and the theme of the text is extremely distressing to the characters. It makes the characters' lives appear traumatic and horrible in contrast with that of the reader's comfortable life. It creates a feeling of sympathy in the reader for the characters, as the text employs descriptive language, emotive language, and structure in order to achieve this effect. Descriptive language has been used throughout the novel to paint a vivid picture of the post-apocalyptic world in which the story takes place. It has also been used in order to create a clear picture in the reader's mind of just how disturbing and uncomfortable the setting of the story truly is. This is able to create an emotional response in the reader of sympathy towards the characters due to the traumatizing events that they go through. An example of descriptive language is in this passage. Huddled up against the back wall were naked people, male and female, all trying to hide, shielding their faces with their hands. On the mattress lay a man with his legs gone to the hip, and the stumps of them blackened and burnt. The smell was hideous. "Jesus," he whispered. Then, one by one, they turned and blinked in the pitiful light. "Help us," they whispered. "Please, help us." Descriptive language here creates a sense of horror and despair, effectively conveying the bleakness of the world in which the characters live in. Descriptive language has also been used in this passage. The town had been abandoned years ago, but they walked the littered streets carefully, the boy holding onto his hand.
They passed a metal trash dump where someone had tried to burn bodies. The charred meat and bones under the damp ash might have been anonymous, save for the shapes of skulls. No longer any smell.
This quotation further paints the image of the state that the world has turned into and conveys to the reader just how desperate and chaotic the world had become. By being descriptive about what happened to the town, McCarthy has vividly created a bleak and haunting atmosphere. The bodies of victims being in this setting makes it seem like there was chaos and madness. However, the description of it being abandoned and the description of the setting having no longer any smell indicates just how empty, desolate, and lifeless the town seems to be, creating a very eerie atmosphere. Emotive language is another stylistic feature that McCarthy uses to create meaning in the road. The use of emotive language in the text serves to generate sympathy for the characters, making their trauma associated with the events of the narrative appear more real and heart-touching. This technique effectively highlights the bleakness of the world depicted in the text, in stark contrast to the reader's own world, which is likely one in a functional, comfortable society. By evoking strong emotions in the reader, the text is able to convey the emotions it aims to more powerfully and leaving a lasting impact on the reader. Emotive language is used in this quotation.
"I want you to wait here," he said. "I won't be far away. I'll be able to hear you if you call."
"Take me with you,"
the boy said. He looked as if he was going to cry. "No, I want you to wait here."
"Please, Papa."
"Stop it. I want you to do what I say. Take the gun."
The text has used emotive language through the boy's plea to go with his father and his apparent distress at being left behind, which makes the reader feel sympathy and feel bad for the boy. Additionally, telling the boy to take the gun is something that would be unheard of in the real world of the reader, and is likely to cause concern, as it highlights the danger that may be around, and how the kid is unsafe, even if the father is only leaving him for a short period of time. This is likely to cause an emotive response in the reader, as the idea of children being endangered like this is something that is deeply unsettling to many viewers. Similarly, in this second passage, we see the father and son discussing whether they would ever resort to cannibalism. The quotation goes, "We wouldn't eat anybody, would we?"
"No, of course not."
"Even if we're starving?"
"We're starving now."
"You said we weren't."
"I said we weren't dying. I didn't say we weren't starving."
"But we wouldn't."
"No, we wouldn't."
"No matter what."
"No, no matter what."
The fact that the father is having a serious conversation about eating another human being in this passage comes as absurd. To the reader, the fact that there is a 9 to 10-year-old living in such conditions that this conversation can happen is a sign that something is seriously wrong. No one could possibly imagine talking about this with a young child in our world, which appears heavenly in contrast to the dystopian nightmare present in the text. The use of emotive language in this passage helps to convey the desperate situation that the characters are in addition to heightening the sense of tension and desperation seen in the harsh and dangerous environment of the text. Structure has been utilized through the text, through repetition and language features, in order to enhance the impact of the themes in the text. It is used to emphasize the bleak nature of the characters' lives and how it consists of trying to survive day to day. The dull nature of the text is also conveyed through the unconventional lack of punctuation, including the lack of speech marks during conversation, which reflects the barren, deserted nature of the text setting. Repetition is used in the text in this paragraph.
"Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God."
"What is it, Papa?"
"Come down, oh my God, come down." Crate upon crate of canned goods. Tomatoes, peaches, beans, apricots, canned hams, corned beef, hundreds of gallons of water in 10-gallon plastic jerry jugs.
This repetition highlights the dire circumstances that the characters are in, as the repetition of the phrase, "oh my God," highlights the enormity of the moment for the characters, while in reality, the reader has access to an even larger abundance of resources than the characters have discovered, which highlights the differences in the lives of the reader and the lives of the characters in the text. Their astonishment at finding this abundance of food can be saddening to the reader, as it juxtaposes with how the reader likely does not know the struggle of not knowing when their next meal will be. Through the repetition in this passage, McCarthy has made it extremely clear how much food really means to the characters, and just how desperate they must be for such a huge reaction. Another element of structure that is used to create meaning in the road is language patterns. Language patterns are used in this quotation through the question and answer structure that it follows. Did you have any friends? Yes, I did. Lots of them? Yes. Do you remember them? Yes, I remember them. What happened to them?
They died.
All of them? Yes, all of them. Do you miss them? Yes, I do. The language pattern of the child asking questions, followed by dull, non-descriptive answers of the father, shows the lack of joy or pleasure and growing nihilist nature of the father. The nihilism is seen through the matter-of-fact way that the man says about his friends dying. By not elaborating and not showing emotions, it shows acceptance on the man's part of these kinds of horrible things that happened long ago. It also shows that, because the man does not show signs of trauma in this discussion, that the idea of death has become normalized, and no longer as something which is to be feared and dreaded. Having lost his entire life to the apocalypse, and having likely seen some very horrible things, the man has become desensitized to the idea of death, and his dull, bland responses reflect the miserable reality of just how bad life is for the protagonists in this text. The reader may interpret this and feel sympathy for the struggling man or child, and make the reader realize that they had taken for granted the reality that they live in, with safety, a family, and friends, of which the characters do not have. The road has successfully conveyed the meaning that the characters are in distress, and that the reader's lives are likely much better than that of the characters, in order to create an emotive response. The third question I'll be talking about today is, by comparing the use of generic conventions in two texts, explore how a genre has evolved over time. The genre that I'll be talking about is the horror genre. The horror genre usually consists of elements such as fear, unsettlement, or shock, in order to create a sense of terror or fear in the reader. The Sixth Sense by M. Night Shyamalan from 1999 and Hotel Transylvania by Genndy Tartakovsky in 2012 are both parts of the horror genre. While The Sixth Sense elicits these aforementioned feelings in the viewer, Hotel Transylvania instead creates an overall sense of amusement through the use of comedic elements. This shows an overall shift towards a more flexible genre, which doesn't need to focus on fear, unsettlement, or shock, and can instead allow for things not usually found in the genre, such as comedic elements, in order to create a different effect on a different target audience. The Sixth Sense has used setting in order to generate tension. An example of this is in a birthday party scene, where the setting takes place in a dark staircase. This setting has an eerie ambience to it, and effectively secludes Cole from the rest of the birthday party, creating a sense of isolation. Later in the scene, Cole is shoved in a cupboard and locked in there, and he can't get out. His screams and banging on the door creates a fear of the unknown, as the viewer doesn't know what's on the other side of this door. His desperate pleads from the other side create a feeling of terror in the reader. Hotel Transylvania, on the other hand, has used setting to subvert the usual genre. An example of this is through the brightly lit, open, busy, and energetic hotel lobby. This subverts the usual horror convention of seclusion and fear, as the hotel lobby is busy left and right and center of friendly monsters that would be willing to help if anything were to happen. There is a similar scene to the scene where Cole is stuck behind a locked door in Hotel Transylvania, where Jonathan, instead, is closed behind a locked door with Dracula. Jonathan's screams can be heard as he bangs on the door, and the viewer might become distressed and uncertain about what is happening on the other side of the door. However, this tension that was generated has been broken as the door bursts open and Jonathan comedically walks out saying, "Check it out, guys, I'm a Frankenhomie." This shows that the horror conventions don't have to be followed in the horror genre, and instead they can be mocked in order to create a different effect, such as comedy. In The Sixth Sense, the characterization of protagonists has been used to follow the horror genre. Cole does not have any real friends other than his mother, and Malcolm, who isn't really alive. Malcolm doesn't appear to have any friends either, other than his wife, who can't even communicate with him. This isolation that is created in both of these characters can make scenes more scary, especially for Cole, as he has less people who he can turn to. In Hotel Transylvania, the monsters act like humans rather than monsters. Rather than being scary antagonists, like in a normal horror movie, the monsters are seen as welcoming and funny protagonists, which is unusual and subverts the horror genre. Dracula's family is seen as similar to a human family, which creates empathy in the viewer. An example of the Dracula family being represented as a normal family is through the smiling, happy moments that Dracula has with baby Mavis, making it seem like a warm, happy family. The idea of isolation is also nowhere to be seen in this movie, as there is a meetup with all of the monsters for Mavis's birthday, which is very similar to a family reunion, including characters such as Frankenstein, Frankenstein's wife, the mummy, the invisible man, and the wolf, and his entire family. The inclusion of all of these characters makes the movie feel too warm and friendly for your typical horror movie, and shows how the genre has changed over time to include more family-friendly elements to target a younger audience. The Sixth Sense uses color and lighting. The film uses dark lighting to create a sense of the unknown and eeriness. The color palette is muted and desaturated, with somber and ominous atmosphere prevalent throughout the entire movie. In the scene where Cole hides in his tent from the ghosts, the dominant use of red creates a sense of fear and danger. The dim red lighting on Cole's face further increases the tension. In Hotel Transylvania, the colors have high contrast for high energy visual. The colors are saturated and vibrant, such as the bright yellow shirt worn by Jonathan, or the bright green color of the monster Blobby. The use of bright and cartoonish colors subverts the horror genre, making it more accessible to a younger target audience. Bright lighting is often used, for example in the hotel lobby, where there is no sense of tension or uneasiness, but instead only comfort and humor. This demonstrates how the genre has evolved to become more focused on a lighthearted and comedic aspects in order to target a younger target audience. In summary, The Sixth Sense follows typical horror genre conventions. It creates an atmosphere of fear and tension, which uses setting, characterization, color, and lighting. The genre has evolved to become more open to different subgenres, namely comedy horror in terms of Hotel Transylvania. Hotel Transylvania includes comedic, lighthearted, and family-friendly elements in order to target a younger target audience.
The end.